the deal of the Louisiana Purchase for $15 million. With the 828,000 square miles of game territory, he sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark along with 45 other men to go explore the new territory. Dire expedition across the western United States turned into the famous Lewis and Clark expedition. There were many dangers on the trail. They had to cross rivers. People suffered injuries, epidemics, famine, and hostile Native American tribes. The Lewis and Clark expedition did take place before the Wild West era, but it was a huge event in United States history, and was one of the main reasons the Wild West era began. 350. Besides just Lewis and Clark, the Wild West era brought many other frontiersmen. Frontiersmen were very self-sufficient compared to normal townspeople. They cleared their own land, they built their own shelter, and they made their own food. Their nomadic lifestyle was hurtful for America's economy. The unemployment made it difficult for more money to go into circulation, and stores were going bankrupt from a lack of customers. This also caused disputed territories against the Native Americans. For example, Charles Bent's arrival into Colorado caused the Taos Revolt. Bent shortly died from an assault from multiple Pueblo warriors. 351. Acculturated places. Spanish West.
Yes. Let's try search this. Because we're reading about the American frontiers. But now I cannot open more. I have like 80 frontiers, main frontier. Oh no, do that. Yes, but not now, but now my computer will totally crash if I keep opening more. Let's try to finish this. Mexican-American War. Okay, let me read that too. Got some Mexico there. Mexico City, Mexico Revolution. Duplicate there, but no. Yes, now we got 80. I cannot open more because my computer totally will crash and die.
In 1848, when America won the Mexican-American War, America gained 7 new territories: California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, Nevada, and Utah. This was the biggest cause of the Wild West era. When lots of people relocated to the underdeveloped Badlands, a pure culture was developed within Western America. Also, the Mexican state of Sonora's culture was acculturated to the Wild West. 352, 353, Canadians. On the 13th of June, 1898, the Yukon Territory Act made the Yukon Territory its own territory. Trails to its capital Dawson City, which gave prospectors access to gold mines, causing the Klondike Gold Rush. 354. The Klondike Trail was a dangerous place. Many wild animals attacked the alpinists. and contagious diseases spread throughout the trail. 355. In total, over 1,000 died on the trail from various causes. 356. 351. American frontier in popular culture. Poster for Buffalo Bill's Wild West show the exploration, settlement, exploitation, and conflicts of the American Old West form a unique tapestry of events, which has been celebrated by Americans and foreigners alike in art, music, dance, novels, magazines, short stories, poetry, theater, video games, movies, radio, television, song, and oral tradition which continues in the modern era. 357. Levi argues that the physical and mythological West-inspired composers Aaron Copland, Roy Harris, Virgil Thomson, Charles Wakefield Cadman, and Arthur Farwell. 358. Religious themes have inspired many environmentalists as they contemplate the pristine West before the frontiersmen violated its spirituality. 359. Actually, as a historian William Cronin has demonstrated, the concept of wilderness was highly negative and the antithesis of religiosity before the Romantic movement of the 19th century. 360. The frontier thesis of historian Frederick Jackson Turner, proclaimed in 1893, 361, established the main lines of historiography which fashioned scholarship for 3 or 4 generations and appeared in the textbooks used by practically all American students. 362. Popularizing Western lore. The mythologizing of the West began with minstrel shows and popular music in the 1840s. During the same period, P.T. Barnum presented native chiefs, dances, and other Wild West exhibits in his museums. However, large-scale awareness took off when the dime novel appeared in 1859, the first being Maliska the Indian wife of the White Hunter. 363. By simplifying reality and grossly exaggerating the truth, the novels captured the public's attention with sensational tales of violence and heroism and fixed in the public's mind stereotypical images of heroes and villains, courageous cowboys and savage natives, virtuous lawmen and ruthless outlaws, brave settlers and predatory cattlemen. Millions of copies and thousands of titles were sold. The novels relied on a series of predictable literary formulas appealing to Thomas' tastes and were often written in as little as a few days. The most successful of all dime novels was Edward S. Ellis' Seth Jones, 1860. Ned Buntline's stories glamorized Buffalo Bill Cody, and Edward L. Wheeler created Deadwood Dick and Hurricane Nell while featuring Calamity Jane. 364. Buffalo Bill Cody was the most effective popularizer of the Old West in the US and Europe. He presented the first Wild West show in 1883, featuring a recreation of famous battles, especially Custer's Last Stand, expert marksmanship, and dramatic demonstrations of horsemanship by cowboys and natives, as well as Sure Shooting Annie Oakley. 365. Elite Eastern writers and artists of the late 19th century promoted and celebrated Western lore. 57. Theodore Roosevelt, wearing his hats as a historian, explorer, hunter, rancher, and naturalist, was especially productive. 366. Their work appeared in upscale national magazines such as Harper's Weekly, featured illustrations by artists Frederick Remington, Charles M. Russell, and others. Readers bought action-filled stories by writers like Owen Wister, conveying vivid images of the Old West. 367. Remington lamented the passing of an era he helped to chronicle when he wrote, "I knew the wild riders and the vacant land were about to vanish forever. I saw the living, breathing end of 3 American centuries of smoke and dust and sweat." 368. 20th century imagery. The Searchers, a 1956 film portraying racial conflict in the 1860s in the 20th century. Both tourists to the West and avid readers enjoyed the visual imagery of the frontier. The Western movies provided the most famous examples, as in the numerous films of John Ford. He was especially enamored of Monument Valley. Critic Keith Phipps says, its 5 square miles, 13 square kilometers, have defined what decades of moviegoers think of when they imagine the American West. 369, 370, 371. The heroic stories coming out of the building of the Transcontinental Railroad in the mid-1860s enlivened many dime novels and illustrated many newspapers and magazines with the juxtaposition of the traditional environment with the iron horse of modernity. 372. Cowboy images. The cowboy has for over a century been an iconic American image both in the country and abroad, recognized worldwide and revered by Americans. 373. Heather Cox Richardson argues for a political dimension to the cowboy image. 374. The timing of the cattle industry's growth meant that cowboy imagery grew to have extraordinary power. Entangled in the vicious politics of the post-war years, Democrats, especially those in the old Confederacy, imagined the West as a land untouched by Republican politicians they hated. They developed an image of the cowboys as men who worked hard, played hard, lived by a code of honor, protected themselves, and asked nothing of the government. In the hands of Democratic newspaper editors, the realities of cowboy life, the poverty, the danger, the debilitating hours became romantic. Cowboys embodied virtues Democrats believed Republicans were destroying by creating a behemoth government catering to lazy ex-slaves. By the 1860s, cattle drives were a feature of the plains landscape, and Democrats had made cowboys a symbol of rugged individual independence, something they insisted Republicans were destroying. The most famous popularizers of the image included part-time cowboy and Rough Rider President Theodore Roosevelt, 1858-1919, a Republican who made cowboy internationally synonymous with the brash, aggressive American. He was followed by trick roper Will Rogers, 1879-1935, the leading humorist after the 1920s. Roosevelt had conceptualized the herder, cowboy, as a stage of civilization distinct from the sedentary farmer, a theme well expressed in the 1944 Hollywood hit Oklahoma. That highlights the enduring conflicts between cowboys and farmers. 375. Roosevelt argued that the manhood typified by the cowboy and outdoor activity and sports generally was essential if American men were to avoid the softness and rot produced by an easy life in the city. 376. Will Rogers, the son of a Cherokee judge in Oklahoma, started with rope tricks and fancy riding, but by 1919 discovered his audiences were even more enchanted with his wit in his representation of the wisdom of the common man. 377. Others who contributed to enhancing the romantic image of the American cowboy include Charles Siringo, 1855-1928, 378, and Andy Adams, 1859-1935. Cowboy, Pinkerton detective, and Western author Siringo was the first authentic cowboy autobiographer. Adams spent the 1880s in the cattle industry in Texas and the 1890s mining in the Rockies. When an 1898 play's portrayal of Texans outraged Adams, he started writing plays, short stories, and novels drawn from his own experiences. His The Log of a Cowboy, 1903, became a classic novel about the cattle business, especially the cattle drive. 379. It described a fictional drive of the Circle. Heard from Texas to Montana in 1882 and became a leading source on cowboy life. Historians retraced its path in the 1960s, confirming its basic accuracy. His writings are acclaimed and criticized for realistic fidelity to detail on the one hand and thin literary qualities on the other. 380. Many regards Red River, 1948, directed by Howard Hawks, and starring John Wayne and Montgomery Clift, as an authentic cattle drive depiction. 381. The unique skills of the cowboys are highlighted in the rodeo. It began in an organized fashion in the West in the 1880s, when several Western cities followed up on touring Wild West shows and organized celebrations that included rodeo activities. The establishment of major cowboy competitions in the East in the 1920s led to the growth of rodeo sports. Trail cowboys, who were also known as gunfighters like John Wesley Hardin, Luke Short and others, were known for their prowess, speed and skill with their pistols and other firearms. Their violent escapades and reputations morphed over time into the stereotypical image of violence endured by the cowboy hero. 286, 382, 383, Code of the West. Historians of the American West have written about the mythic West, the West of Western literature, art and of people's shared memories. 384. The phenomenon is the imagined West. 385. The Code of the West was an unwritten, socially agreed upon set of informal laws shaping the cowboy culture of the Old West. 386, 387, 388. Over time, the cowboys developed a personal culture of their own, a blend of values that even retained vestiges of chivalry. Such hazardous work in isolated conditions also bred a tradition of self-dependence and individualism, with great value put on personal honesty, exemplified in songs and cowboy poetry. 389. The code also included the gunfighter, who sometimes followed a form of code edulo adopted from the Old South, in order to solve disputes and duels. 390. 391. Extrajudicial justice. See, during the frontier days such as lynching, vigilantism and gunfighting, in turn popularized by the Western genre, would later be known in modern times as examples of frontier justice. 392. 393. Historiography. Scores of Turner students became professors in history departments in the Western states and taught courses in the frontier. 394. Scholars have debunked many of the myths of the frontier, but they nevertheless live on in community traditions, folklore, and fiction. 395. In the 1970s, a historiographical range war broke out between the traditional frontier studies, which stress the influence of the frontier on all of American history and culture, and the new Western history, which narrows the geographical and time framework to concentrate on the Trans-Mississippi West after 1850. It avoids the word frontier and stresses cultural interaction between white culture and groups such as natives and Hispanics. History professor William Weeks of the University of San Diego argues that in this new Western history approach it is easy to tell who the bad guys are. They are almost invariably white, male, and middle class or better, while the good guys are almost invariably non-white, non-male, or non-middle class. Anglo-American civilization is represented as patriarchal, racist, genocidal, and destructive of the environment, in addition to hypocritically betrayed the ideals on which it supposedly is built. 396. However, by 2005, Aaron argues, the two sides had reached an equilibrium in their rhetorical argument. Sound critiques. 397. Meanwhile, environmental history has emerged, in large part from the frontier historiography, hence its emphasis on wilderness. 398. It plays an increasingly large role in frontier studies. 399. Historians are